Things aren't going too well for my wife and myself. I'm 27 and I've been a construction worker ever since I was 18. Up until a while ago, I had no trouble staying employed since I started working in 2004. I was fortunate to be part of a company that was able to survive the poor economy over the past couple of years, at least up until now. Due to some lawsuits, my company went bankrupt. I lost my job and I was working under the table for so long, so I don't get unemployment. I was worried. As a man, I had to provide for my family. My wife and I have 2 children that we need to take care of. She works retail, but doesn't make enough money to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I immediately began to look for another job, but I had no education, so it wasn't easy. I browsed Craigslist. I was willing to do anything: construction, yard work, physical labor, transportation, security, you name it. I'd occasionally get a job or two, but I had the trouble keeping my head above the water. That is, until I saw a job offer on Craigslist. Weak physical labor needed. Earn $1,000+ a week heavy labor. Call at. I figured it was some sort of scam, but I was desperate, so I called a number and inquired about job. A man answered the phone. He explained that he owned a large plot of land just outside the town, and he needed someone to come dig holes. You could tell from his voice that he was no young man, which is probably why he couldn't just dig his holes himself. I asked a few more questions. How big are these holes? Why does he want them? How long does he expect digging one will take, etc. He explained that there was a monster in the forest at night, and the holes were to be dug in the forest then converted to booby traps in order to catch that monster. He needed as many holes as possible. They needed to be approximately 9 feet deep and 4 feet by 4 feet across, although I may need to make them wider so I have more room to dig. He explained that the soil was hard, so each hole would take at least 3 days to dig, and I couldn't use heavy machinery inside the forest without damaging trees, and I had to break through tree roots with a shovel. It was clear I was talking to a mentally ill man. I mean, you could tell he was old by his voice. He must have had a dementia or schizophrenia or something like that. I just wanted to make it clear that there is no way he was sane whatsoever. Monsters don't exist, and he was probably going to hurt himself by falling into one of these booby traps. I'm pretty sure booby trapping your own property is illegal anyway. Despite this, I needed the money. I didn't care how hard I'd have to work or what I'd have to do as long as I didn't hurt anyone innocent. I was willing to do it to provide for my family. I agreed to help him on the condition that he pays me in cash every single day before I did any work. I didn't want to be scammed or find out that he was just some old man in social security, and he agreed. My first day of work was the very next day. I drove out to his property and went up to knock on the door. I saw an envelope taped to the door with my name on it. Inside the envelope was $333.33 and a note explaining that he's not home right now, but his shed is unlocked, so I can use any tools. He told me to dig the first hole deep in the forest. Now, the forest was nothing like I imagined. I imagined a thick grove of trees on someone's property, but this forest was almost a square mile of jungle. You couldn't see more than 5 or 10 feet in front of you because of the dense foliage obstructing your view. I walked about 10 minutes into the center of the forest and found a good spot for a home. He was right. The soil was hard for the first root. It took all my strength to move just one small shovel of it. I spent a good 10 hours digging that day. I only stopped once for a quick lunch break. I had brought 4 gallons of water with me into the forest. I called it a day after I had drank the final one. I was exhausted and could barely move, but I had just made over $300. That is $30 an hour, more than I was making at my construction job. It's enough money to buy a month of groceries for us if we get lucky. It was tough, but I was providing for my family. I made it home, took a bath and went to sleep. I got a good night's sleep and was back to the old man's house by 6 a.m. the very next day. I again went up to the door to meet him, but there was another envelope. In it, there was another $666.67 and a note. I was just getting home as you were leaving yesterday. I tried to get your attention, but I failed. I saw your hole, and you're making good progress. If you do as much today as you did yesterday, you'll be done. I grabbed the money and went digging. 12 hours a day. It took 22 hours altogether, but I had finished the hole and made 1,000. Now I could pay the rent that month too. I took 2 days off from digging. My body ached and I had to stay at home all day. I figured that with practice I could routinely dig 2 holes a week. He said he wants as many as possible, so if he could afford to give me 2,000 a week, that would be great. My wife and I could finally pay our medical debt and save some money for when the old man doesn't need more holes. This went on for over months. He was never home, he'd just leave the money and instructions as to where he wanted the next hole. I'd go in and start digging at 6 a.m. and leave by 5 p.m. so I could eat dinner with my kids. My body was being worn out, but it provided the necessary income. It took me 18 hours to dig a hole, 2 days work. I'd go and look over the past holes I dug occasionally to make sure he wasn't burying human bodies or anything. He wasn't. He wasn't even converting them to booby traps. Some holes caved in, others held their shape, but for the most part they were just how I had left them. Who knows why I was digging holes? Maybe he was trying to recreate the book Holes, where they were looking for treasures in the desert. One day, when I got to his property, there was more than one envelope on the door. I opened and read the second one and realized the old man had another laborer, another hole digger. In my letter, he told me he needed 120 more holes altogether. 120! I'd have worked for a long time, even if someone else started to help. I waited for and talked to the second guy. He seemed like a nice guy. He was older than me by a good 20 years, but he was in a similar position as me. He used to work in the automobile industry and was recently fired. He needs a roof and food too, and thought this job sounded too good to be true, but he was willing to take that risk. Soon thereafter, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. We were dropped from our insurance, and most of the money I was making, which was a lot of money, went to medical bills. The months went on. 120 holes became 100, and 100 became 50. We were okay at that point, but I was worried about what would happen after I no longer was needed to dig holes. One day I finished my hole early. As I was walking away, I noticed my friend digging his hole. He was almost done, 5 feet wide, 9 feet deep. I grabbed his ladder and walked away. 2 weeks later, I filled his hole. The old man was right. There is a monster in the forest. He's still insane, for believing a monster will be caught by its own booby trap.